Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy Seeley, president of Seeley Test Pros and LEAP, helping students to succeed in all kinds of tests from 8th grade to grad school throughout Ohio.
And I'm Mike Bergen, president of Chariot Learning, helping students with Test School and Life based out of Rochester, New York.
Between the two of us today, we have over 60 years of experience at the highest levels of the test preparation and supplemental education industries.
We both love to talk and learn about the latest issues in education, testing, and admissions. So let's get down to tests and the rest. The fascinating topic we want to explore today is enrolling in a trade school. But first, let's meet our special guest, Brady Colby.
Brady Colby is the head of market research at Validated Insights, helping higher education institutions achieve and exceed their goals. He has used his educational background and years of experience to help hundreds of universities, companies, and investors inform business decisions by simplifying and clarifying complex market data. He provides a murky market with the most relevant industry news about OPMs, MOOCs, and boot camps. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Colby, we are really glad to have you. The topic of trade schools is one that, while we've definitely interspersed references to trade schools in many of our episodes, we've never actually dedicated a show to one. So this is a long time coming. You're the guy to speak to. Before we dive into the topic, we'd love to hear a bit about your background and what brought you kind of to this corner of higher ed.
Yeah, so I've spent pretty much my entire career doing market research. Well, my entire career doing market research, specifically in the field of online learning, mainly with helping traditional four-year institutions understand the market for online degrees and certificate programs. And then more recently, in my most recent role, now that I'm here with Validated Insights, we help a broader spectrum of institutions, so that includes a lot of trade schools. So it's really the whole spectrum of post-secondary education options that we help. So I've been expanding my expertise into some other different educational options and learning about these other paths into the workforce. And so after years of working with colleges and universities, kind of like yourselves, there's been a lot of attention lately to these other educational institutions. And so I've been working on updating my repository of knowledge about these schools.
It's so interesting when you say that, because when Mike and I started the podcast, the idea of like online college was something like, oh, this is sort of interesting. I wonder, want to pursue this or find out more. But at the same time, we didn't, because obviously with COVID, like everything pushed forward online.
Yeah.
And so now even the notion of online college feels like that's just par for the course. My daughter is a sophomore in college, and she just told me all of her almost all of her courses next year at a local institution are actually, for the most part, going to be online, which is interesting, right? I'm sure that's a trend, the data research that you've been pulling for the last few years, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the lines really got blurred between what is online and what is on campus, because there's so much adoption and use of these online learning tools just in a standard traditional higher education setting. I mean, every student is logging into Blackboard or Moodle throughout the course of their program, and then attending lectures in person. So really, it got down to that's the only thing that's changing is are you sitting in your house whenever you're listening to the lecture, or are you sitting there with the other group of students? So it's really been the blurring of those lines.
Now, you say you've been researching the higher education market for a while. Did you start in the trade school side, and then as you joined Validated Insights, expand, or did you start in a different sector and then expand that into where now you're looking more at trade schools?
So I started originally way back in my internship days, my very first introduction into educational technology. I came from my mom worked in higher education for years. And so my first internship was with an educational technology provider that provides like student information systems, like real backbone tools for higher education institutions. So it wasn't a whole lot about like what students are doing, but it was just getting acquainted with higher education and, how technology decisions are made. And then my next role was with a company called Academic Partnerships, it's now called RisePoint, and they partner with higher education institutions to design and deliver online degrees. So that's whenever I really started getting into the field of like, okay, well, what do prospective students want to do? How do they want to learn? What are institutions doing to try and meet that need? And then started my own business, really focused on working with the terms alternative market data. So aggregating and collecting hard to get data And then the organization that I started, 32 EDU, got acquired in 2023 by Validated Insights, a digital marketing agency. And so I've been rolling up the market research vertical here. And so an aspect of what we do here is not just working with those 4-year schools. It's been working with, all those other educational institutions. So my background for most of my career was these traditional college campuses and what are they doing to address this pivot to online. And then in the past couple of years, it's been more learning about, all right, let's talk about the whole range of options that students have now, and let's really dive into that, not just from the perspective of, what's the market for college look like, but what does that whole range of options look like for adults that are interested in lifelong learning or upskilling, or teens that are trying to make a decision about what they want to do after high school graduation. And that can mean, that was even, the absence of education after that, gap year options. I mean, just everything that people are trying to do to connect from education to employment.
You're not kidding. There's so many different options that students can pursue after graduation from high school. And yeah, we've explored a lot of them. We talk about 4-year schools, we talk about 2-year schools, we talk about gap years, we talk about
Yeah.
going right into the workforce, going into the military.
Yep.
And then there's trade schools. And I think that for the purposes of this conversation, we shouldn't assume that everybody thinks the same thing when the term trade school comes up. Can you define in today's market what is a trade school?
Okay, you're exactly right. It's not even limited to just folks that are new to the conversation about trade schools. If you're looking through industry publications, you really have to be careful with reading the appendices to make sure that you're understanding the definitions being used, because depending on who you ask, you can get a different definition. I mean, some folks might define them as broadly as including a community college, but for our purposes, the way that we've approached it is defining a trade school as an institution that primarily, not exclusively, but overwhelmingly primarily offers programs below the baccalaureate level that are typically tied to a field with strict licensure requirements in the state,
certification
or
type of programs,
like
right?
certifications or licensures.
Credentials, badges. Yeah.
Yep. But then there's also a number of trade school field. So the first ones that come to mind whenever you think about it, it's one of those kind of things where it's like, when you see it sort of thing, you think about all of the healthcare support roles, and they have those specific credentials tied to employment, cosmetology. But then there's a number of ones that aren't tied to a specific licensure, but they have a very direct path to employment. So, think about culinary arts, things where there's
That's
not
what
a
comes
specific.
to mind for me,
Yep.
culinary.
There's not a specific certification, but there's a very direct and clear path from the skills that you obtain throughout that educational program to a specific role in the workforce. But again, it goes back to that whole definition of, we're looking at things that are almost exclusively tied to below the baccalaureate level. A lot of trade schools do offer programs above those levels, but so we have to include schools that offer those programs. But the vast majority of what they're doing is programs in these sub-baccalaureate programs that are really specifically tied to employment in a particular field, most often in the skilled trades or healthcare. Yeah, I would say it's definitely something that you have to make sure you read the appendices on when you're looking at market research about it.
And so you said some of the other trades that might be like, is HVAC or machinist, are those
Exactly.
standard trade?
So,
yeah.
Yeah, so we've got a list of trade school occupations that would be schools that prepare students for employment in those fields are included in. So just to kind of summarize the list, basically a sub-baccalaureate institution that prepares students for roles in healthcare support, in cosmetology or culinary arts, in maintenance and repair technology, other skilled trades, computers and IT. And then we also include broader like public technical schools. So
Right, the
that would
technical
be
schools and the IT, right? You don't have to necessarily, if you want to be like a programmer, something like that. People do that. Okay, this is great. And I really appreciate that you mentioned the overlap with community colleges, because we recognize community colleges as being very responsive to local industry.
Yeah.
and serving to fill in middle skills.
Yeah.
But also you go to a community college and you're getting an associate's degree and you might
Yeah.
then go on. So this is different. What is the status in the year 2025 of the conventional trade school in terms of popularity? Are trade schools as popular as ever, more popular than ever, declining in interest? What are you seeing, Brady?
So what was really interesting in looking at the data for this, you can look over the past almost 20 years, and you can see that trade school programs, that trade school specifically, not just trade school programs, but trade school specifically, they were pretty flat. There was a standard, few percent of the population that was interested in and going into trade schools. Well, about 2020, we saw that trend fundamentally shift and a
Do you
growth
think that
trajectory
shift
start.
though was COVID, or do you think it's just like as a in the bigger picture of education? I'm curious because it did sort of happen at the same time. I don't know if one was
COVID
related
was
to the other.
definitely, yeah, COVID was definitely an aspect of it. There's been some surveys that try to pin down specifically why there's been this big shift. One, I think, is just the broader conversation about, hey, let's make everybody aware of all of the post-secondary educational options. And there's been a real rise in popularity, with just talking about what other options are available because of the difficult workforce dynamics these days. So it's like, hey, let's let everybody know about all of the options that are on the table. So that's been an aspect of it. There was a number of surveys that were produced around the time of during COVID and immediately after COVID that asked about how COVID impacted their educational plans. And a lot of both teens and adult learners indicated that COVID did impact their educational plans in a way that made them more likely to be interested in trade school. And most of the respondents, it's they tried to get like objective data points about what the specific underlying causes were of it. Most of them were about looking at shorter, more cost effective programs. But then a lot of it was about how they became more sensitive to job changes. They had layoffs. They were looking for a career change, and they now, for whatever reason, I haven't quite pinned down the underlying reason. Now they were more open to than historically, more open to fields, employment in fields that trade schools service. So, yeah, it happened during COVID, but I can't quite parse out from the survey data yet exactly why. I know fundamentally it was changes with difficulty in finding employment, but there just kind of was this spike in popularity and working in skilled trades after that.
Yeah, it's really interesting because we've all seen it happen, and as you say, it's not a direct necessary connection to a
Yeah,
pandemic, but there are more people, or more and more we see trade school and alternate career paths as opposed to going right for a 4-year degree as being shared
yeah,
with students, even in high schools where many, large percentage of students go on to 4-year college. It's saying this is an acceptable route.
yeah,
This is not only an acceptable route, but for some students, this is a desirable route. This is the
yeah,
right way to go. I think that we reached a point in the US where going to college was the default.
yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
And it's possible that many people went to college and it wasn't the right path for them,
Right.
or they weren't ready at the time, which is a whole other point, right? Like committing to a trade school and working in trades doesn't mean that you have to do that all your life.
Yeah,
Just like going
exactly.
to college, you're not dedicated to a
Yeah.
certain area.
Well, what's really interesting is looking at how the public perception of post-secondary options, it really provides this kind of, the public has this really conflicting view of what they think about it, because overwhelmingly the public has a real, they report a real kind of skepticism about colleges these days, but then at the same time they report this really high level of understanding that it's needed. They
Sure.
still say like, hey, the bachelor's degree is still 100% the best way to a productive and a productive
Well,
career
it
and a
has
good
to do
life
with
outcome.
projected lifetime earnings,
Yeah,
Right.
which
exactly.
are
It still
substantial.
fundamentally
Yeah.
is. Yeah. But at the same time, they'll express skepticism. There was one survey by Gallup at the end of 2024. It was talking about the net favorability ratings of different entities, and trade schools had a 69 net favorability rating. Ivy League colleges had a 13 net favorability rating.
Wow.
That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Well,
Well,
but you ask anybody about what are the outcomes of an Ivy League institution versus a trade school, and everybody knows, and it's perfectly clear in the data that the lifetime earnings potential and actuality of an Ivy League graduate versus a trade school graduate are fundamentally different. I mean, it's still you're going to make a lot more money as an Ivy League graduate, but the public has this skepticism about them right now, even though they acknowledge. But so I've got a little bit of a thesis about it. I think there's been so much conversation about how what's the purpose of post-secondary education? Is it this comprehensive whole person education, kind of the liberal arts perspective, or is it about career outcomes?
well, and I was going to say that to me, as a parent of like 5 kids who span, even a few
Yeah,
generations, right, Mike? There's such a difference because I can think about how I felt about higher ed and
yeah,
college education for my oldest, who graduated in 2008 from high school versus my latest one who graduated in 2023. And for me right now, I'm thinking all about just, I want to make sure when you finish this in 4 years, you got a job. Like
right.
that is my prime concern and I think a lot of times for students, we know that they're nervous or anxious. We know that they feel kind of unsure.
Yeah,
And I think part of that is knowing you're getting a degree that you don't know what that makes you
yeah,
at the
yeah,
end of 4 years. I can feel that. I mean, I was a history major. I was secondary ed, but
yep,
the idea is like I knew what I was supposed to be. And I
yeah,
think for these kids, there's this notion of I'm going to do this. When I leave, I'm going to be able to do this. And my
yeah,
ability to get a job is
yeah.
probably far more secured because I know what I was when I graduated. I mean, I
Exactly.
don't know if that's a factor, but
That's
I see that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, and kids are thinking about what are their career aspirations and getting specific about it a little bit earlier now. There's been a real push to start having those conversations earlier in, K-12 education so that, because it really seems like it was pushing off the conversation of, hey, we'll educate you, we'll get you ready, and then you figure out what you want to do. And now it's like, no, we want to talk about it earlier so that we can make an informed decision about what we want to do to get there.
And I think a lot of the most responsive high schools are doing this already. I know in
Yeah,
my own district,
big
which is
time.
I'm in upstate New York, and my local school district is amazing
Yeah,
and is the kind of district that appeals to the highest academically achieving
yep,
students. That's the culture. But
yep,
they also have a really profound focus on getting students for whom that's not the right path
yep,
into, in New York, it's a BOCES, it's a EMCC, it's doing some trades while you're in high school. And Amy knows this, and many listeners know this. My son did that. He
yep,
did culinary while he was in high school, and that was what he was interested in, and he's a chef today.
yeah,
That seems to be really common
yeah,
in either there are some schools that are like all in on college prep and they're really not talking about anything else. There are
yep,
some schools that are all in on everything but college prep. They're
yep,
into military or you're going to get a
yep,
job, but they're not really helping. But then I find it amazing that there are some schools that have a culture that embraces all the options.
yep. Yeah, that's exactly the case. And one of the kind of the big signals of that shift, I can't remember which charter school network it was, but one of the largest, maybe the largest charter school network, uh, earlier this year, they had always in their mission statement talked about how they're preparing their graduates for college, and then they changed it to reflect that exact sort of ethos where
Right.
they're like, hey, we're preparing students for whatever path that they ultimately land on post high school, and if that's college, then we're preparing them for that. If it's something else, we're preparing them for that. So it's really just talking about all of the options.
I have a tangentially related question. It has to do with
Yeah,
trade schools in general. We mentioned four-year schools and community colleges, most of which are nonprofits.
yeah,
Are trade schools mostly for-profit institutions or are there
overwhelmingly, yeah,
nonprofit?
I
yeah,
Mostly
thought the same
for-profit.
thing. I was wondering that, Mike, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Overwhelmingly, yeah,
And I think it's important to point out that in any research on graduation rate,
yep.
for-profit institutions have the lowest graduation and persistence and graduation rates.
Well, and debt repayment abilities too. Yeah.
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 And does that apply when we're talking about trade schools? Does that trend apply?
Yeah, it does. It's hard to parse out because there's not a whole lot of public trade schools, so it's hard to parse out, exactly how the comparison between public and nonprofit looks, specifically in the field of trade schools. We do know, like, historically, trade schools or historically for profits have had, you know, poor outcomes by some measures. We also know that historically they've served a population that was disproportionately more likely to, before they even started, was more disproportionately likely to have poorer outcomes in terms of graduation rates and actual financial outcomes. So it's been hard to parse out exactly like the level of responsibility, like that you can attribute to each piece of the puzzle. What I can say though is that in the general discourse, whenever you're speaking about higher education in general, the public has a bit of skepticism about for-profit higher education. But if you talk to trade school students specifically, they're a lot less skeptical about it. So there's something really fundamentally different about a
Well, it
person.
makes sense. They're buying
Yeah.
it. They're less
Right.
skeptical. They've actually put their money
Well, and
into it. Yeah, they've
exactly. Well,
invested.
it's because they have that specific career outcome already in mind.
That's right.
Because you can say with certainty, like, I know what this is going to prepare me to do. You're basically paying for that uncertainty in that way.
Well, there's clarity sooner,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
if your pathway is a 2-year program and at the end of the 2-year program, you're employed within the industry you just got your, technical degree in, you can see that. Whereas if I graduate as an English major and I'm not really sure, there's like clarity of where can I end up. And, it might take more time to see the connection of, yes, I'm glad I went to college and got this degree because now I'm doing this.
Right.
It's a different time frame, I think, for each.
So
Totally.
Going back to my thesis that I had that I didn't quite get to finish the thought earlier, but my thesis was that there's kind of this debate going on about, is post-secondary education about that whole person, holistic liberal arts perspective, or is it about career preparation? And my thesis is that the institutions that are going to perform the best are the ones that pick one or the other, not try and do
You
both.
can't straddle the fence is what you're basically saying. You got to be one or the other.
Right. And so it's like, what's your mission statement? If you're a post-secondary education institution that's all about, we're completely about the education of the whole person, and we trust that you'll figure it out. After that, we're going to get you ready for whatever path, or it's like, we're going to prepare you for a specific job, and that's it. As long as you're kind of clear about, hey, this is what we do, then students will have that clarity to know this is what I want from that option. So they're best poised for growth because of that clarity.
That makes a lot of sense. So I guess one last question, and I'm curious about what your research and expertise indicates. These seem to be tough times for four-year institutions. The colleges, private and public both, are being attacked from many fronts. They are losing ground. They're losing students. They're losing their international applicants as more and more international schools are growing to prominence. Like, there's lots of different reasons why college presidents are nervous. Should trade schools be another reason?
I don't see them as a threat to traditional higher education primarily. One of the more interesting thought leadership pieces that I saw a few years ago that was kind of talking about this subject and it was to an audience of university leaders, and they were making the point that your primary competitor is not another institution. Your primary competitor is a potential student's decision to not enroll.
Mm-hmm. To not do anything.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I think that that's kind of the perspective that I bring into this, that it's not so much, we've got a whole bunch of folks that aren't doing anything.
That's an interesting way of looking at it, right? You have people who don't do anything. The idea is to have them see the value or the benefit to themselves in enrolling.
Yeah, by saying, hey, I don't think you had a fully informed perspective of all of the options that are available. Now, there's obviously going to be some give and take, and there's obviously been some pull of students away from four-year institutions into trade schools. However, I haven't seen specific numbers on it, but my wager would be that the vast majority of the growth would be from those previous non-enrollers.
Fabulous. You know, Brady, this is so fascinating. We could speak with you about it all day. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you all for having me.
If listeners would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Just send me a connection on LinkedIn and be happy to chat.
Awesome. We hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as we did. Be sure to join us for another fascinating topic and guest on the next Tests and the Rest.
Did you enjoy this episode as much as we did? Find expanded links and more for this and all of our episodes at our show page at testsandtherest.com. While you're there, be sure to explore everything the larger TestBright site has to offer, including real, expert, unbiased answers to the toughest admissions testing questions. Of course, we'd love for you to rate, review, and subscribe to Test and the Rest on your favorite podcast platform. If there's a topic or guest you'd like us to feature, just let us know and spread the word.